For most rugby fans that are a similar age to me, Johnathan Davies is best known as a hugely popular and knowledgeable rugby pundit. But back in the 80s and early 90s, he was one of rugby's greatest talents and one of its biggest superstars. Part of that famous Welsh outside half factory, he was a cult hero during the last years of the amateur era. But at the peak of his powers, and as current Welsh captain, he made the controversial decision to head up north and play rugby league, switching codes and leaving him hated and ostracised amongst the rugby union community. So how did we get to this point? Well, as ever, we have to go back to the beginning. Johnathan was born in the small town of Trimsaran in Carmarthenshire. His father was a player for the local side and in fact set up the youth team that Johnathan himself played in. He played for both school and for Trimsaran, but very quickly was put into the Wales schoolboy system. For him though, it was all about playing for his father's side. After leaving school, he went to work in an open cast mine, but then he was given an opportunity to play for Neath, and when he impressed the folks at the Knoll, they found a job for him as an apprentice decorator with an employer who would allow him to train when he was required. It's mad to think now in the days of professionalism that these guys were literally playing in packed stadiums full of thousands of people and literally as a hobby. It's mental now when you think of it. After consistently impressing for Neath, he was called into the Wales team and before you knew it, he was being thrust into making his debut to face the old enemy England. Davies being selected though was not a straightforward affair. Many of the giants of the 70s had long since retired and in the early 80s, Welsh rugby was on a gradual decline. In fact, preceding this year's tournament, there had been an unprecedented amount of chopping and changing as the committee of selectors, known as the Big Five, struggled to find a team that could bring Wales back to the glory days. Outside half had been a particular issue, with a few different options being tried out, but no one was able to make the famous jersey their own. So, heading into that year's Five Nations, the Cardiff outside half Gareth Davies was recalled after 3 years out of the squad to have another shot at running the show at 10. Wales beat Scotland in the opener but lost at home to Ireland for the first time in years and were comfortably beaten by France, with Gareth Davies having a particularly poor game that afternoon. With the final game against England at the Arms Park approaching, Gareth Davies was informed that the Wales squad was going to be named, but outside half was going to be left blank and just put as another, meaning the Big Five had yet to decide who they wanted at outside half and they wanted to leave it till last minute to decide. Davies was not impressed and he spoke to one of the selectors on the phone and was informed that this actually was the case, and feeling completely disrespected and angered by the decision, he declared himself unavailable to face England. Ironically, a few days later the selectors actually approached Gareth and told him that they needed him to play against England, but to be fair to him, he stuck at his guns and told them where to go. And behind that backdrop is how Jiffy got his first cap for Wales. The pressure on him must have been immense. So what did he do? He went out and absolutely bossed it. He scored a try and a drop goal and won the Man of the Match award, making it clear straight away that he was made for international rugby. Practically overnight, he was heralded as the new hope for Welsh rugby. His exciting style with electric pace, amazing skills, and utter fearlessness to try anything from anywhere made him so exciting to watch and gave Welsh fans hope that the next few years they would reascend to the top of world rugby with him at the forefront. So, heading into the 86 Five Nations, there was a sense of expectations. With Jiffy now at the helm at outside half and a team of talented youngsters around him like Bob Norster and John Devereux, Welsh fans looked forward to a successful championship. This actually was an incredibly important championship, as this run of games would be the beginning of building up to the first ever Rugby World Cup, so having a good tournament here was vitally important to begin to build momentum. In the opening game away at Twickenham, both teams battled tooth and nail in a really close affair, and England just edged out the brave Welsh effort. The following week at home to Scotland, Wales made a return to winning ways with another hard-fought performance, which is probably most remembered for that insane kick from Paul Thorburn, which had to be at least like 65 or 70 metres with the angle. and I just love his reaction after he kicks it. It's just like pure surprise that he actually got it over from that distance. They followed that up by beating Ireland, but unfortunately would be beaten by a strong French side at home to end the tournament in a disappointing fashion. The team came under a fair bit of criticism for their middling tournament, and for the first time Jiffy got a little bit of flack in the press, and I maybe began to feel what the weight of that 10 jersey really represented. With the World Cup on the horizon in the not too distant future in New Zealand, and with a squad that lacked any experience touring or playing away from home, the Union organised the tour to the South Sea Islands in an attempt to get the squad ready for the demands of the up-and-coming tournament. Unfortunately for the playing squad, the Big Five had neglected to take into account the brutal affair that this tour would be on the pitch. In the first game against Fiji, there was plenty of scuffles and some real physical play from the Fijians as to be expected, with plenty of incidents which, had it not been on a rugby pitch, could be deemed as assault, to be frank. Wales' quality shone through though, and they got their tour off to a winning start. There was to be no respite though, because if the boys thought the first game was a rough one, the second game has gone down in Welsh myth for the sheer lunacy of the events on the pitch. By all accounts, it was an 80-minute brawl with very, very little rugby being played. And interestingly, there's actually no video clips of this game because apparently the original recording went missing, and many Welsh people in the rugby circles are quite certain it was to cover up some of the acts of the Tongan players that day. But of course, we will never know. A funny story actually. In the after-game dinner, the Tongans had asked someone to say a few words about Tonga in Welsh. Johnathan apparently volunteered being a Welsh speaker and stood up, speaking in Welsh, proceeded to completely slate the disrespectful and disgraceful acts of the Tongan players from that game, and basically said that it was the worst country he'd ever visited, and the damning monologue was met by a rapturous applause around the room. The Welsh players thought it was hilarious, and the locals thought it was amazing to hear someone speaking Welsh in their country. Anyway, they rounded off the final game against Samoa successfully, winning all 3 games and developing a camaraderie that would serve them well over the coming year. Following the tour, Johnathan found himself in some real controversy though, as he had done an interview in a newspaper stating that one day he could actually see himself playing rugby league. Now, it doesn't seem like a big deal, but back in the amateur era, it was completely against the rules to even have a meeting with a rugby league team, and the WRU decided to come down on him hard, threatening to kick him out of the squad completely for what they deemed as him attempting to advertise himself as available to rugby league scouts. Johnathan explained his comments, and to be honest, I think the selectors realised that to win, they really needed his star power in the team. His star power would not be enough though, because Wales actually had a pretty dreadful tournament, losing every game except England at home. And though there was some promising players in that Welsh team, heading into the inaugural World Cup, nobody gave Wales a hope in hell. With the standard of Welsh rugby now coming under constant criticism, the WRU began to actually garner some of the spotlight because people started to question whether the union was fit for purpose and keeping up with the times. And how sad is it hearing that sentence, knowing that practically we're in the same position nearly 50 years later? Depressing. Anyway, given that the union were starting to come under pressure, they knew they had to get the preparations for the World Cup spot on to give the players the best chance of succeeding. So, what did they do? Well, they organised a 2-day weekend in Tenby on the beers, culminating in a fun run at the end of the weekend. And then they chucked the boys on the plane off to New Zealand, and that was the preparations for the first ever World Cup. Mental. Against all odds though, Jiffy and the boys played some really good rugby, getting better every game, beating Ireland, Tonga and Canada as they progressed through the group stages, setting up a monumentous clash against their bitter rivals England. England went into this as favourites, but as they had done throughout the tournament, the Welsh team proved the doubters wrong and comfortably beat their rivals 16-3. The semi-finals though against host New Zealand was a bridge too far. New Zealand proved that they were moving far ahead in the amateur days and started to treat the game more like professionals, and the gulf showed on the scoreboard, which finished 49-6. In fairness, they did show great character to beat Australia and finish third overall. Jiffy was instrumental in that result, and to this day is still the highest ever Welsh Rugby has finished in a Rugby World Cup. As 1988 rolled around, Johnathan started that year injured, and in fairness used this time to help build his off-the-field profile, laying the groundwork for the career that would come after retirement. During this time though, he would also grab the headlines for the wrong reasons, as he was involved in a serious car incident, accidentally hitting a lamppost and flipping his car right over. When the police arrived, he was actually found to be 3 times over the limit and was banned from driving. Thankfully, no one was hurt, and this served as a real wake-up call for him to get back fit and focus in on playing rugby. At club level, Jiffy would make further headlines, leaving Neath where he was captain at the time and moving over to West Wales rivals Llanelli. This, of course, did not go down well with the Neath players and the supporters, but in fairness to Johnathan, he had grown up supporting Llanelli, so from his point of view, you can kind of understand this decision and why he took that opportunity. As fate would have it, the Scarlets actually met the All Blacks in the cup final that year, and when Johnathan went into the changing room for the final, he found a letter in there with his name on it. When he opened it, it was a picture of him with a noose around his neck, signed by all of the Neath players. A little bit excessive, but Neath had a reputation back in that day and age as a real hard team, and someone with less confidence and mental fortitude could have shrunk into their shell upon reading this note. Not Jiffy though. He went out and played a superb game. He won the man of the match and helped his new club lift the Schweppes Cup. Now back in the red of Wales, in the 1988 Five Nations opener against England, Johnathan was tremendous, nailing a drop goal, going on multiple long runs, beating defenders for fun, giving them verbals on his way past 2, as Wales run out fairly comfortable winners in Twickenham. The next week, Johnathan was on fire again, scoring a try, and when the team really needed it, he nailed another drop goal to do just enough to edge past a game Scottish outfit. The following week, Wales secured their first Triple Crown since the 70s, beating Ireland at Lansdowne Road 9-12. They then welcomed a strong France team to the Arms Park with the chance of winning a first Grand Slam in a decade. But the script wasn't to be. The terrible Welsh weather played right into the hands of the big French pack, who just about ground out the result 9-10. Johnathan's star had grown again, and he was beginning to become a star that was starting to transcend the sport itself. Following the success of the World Cup and the Five Nations, the WRU had the ill-fated idea of thinking that this was a good time to tour current world champions New Zealand. New Zealand were the best team in the amateur era by a country mile. They were already at the point where they were preparing and acting like professionals. The men in red would lose warm-up matches to Waikato and then Wellington 2 days later. Not an ideal start for the tour, and in fact tour captain Bleddyn Bowen broke his arm and would have to return to Wales. The first test of the series, Wales were routed 52 points to 3, knowing that they would have to face the same team a week later. But before that, they still had to play another 2 games against provincial sides during the week before the test match. In Bowen's absence, Davies was given the honour of captaining his country for the first time, and in another battering at the hands of New Zealand, Jiffy scored the only try for Wales as they lost 54-9 at Eden Park. After this tour, it was abundantly clear the gulf in class between the Southern Hemisphere sides and where Wales were at the time. This left a lot of soul-searching by all involved, and the players knew that something needed to change. Being the captain and one of the senior players, Johnathan and Rob Norster, decided to write a letter to the senior members of the WRU from the players' point of view on what they felt needed to change and where Wales needed to go to be able to keep up with the Southern Hemisphere nations. They weren't asking to be paid or anything like that, but they were just asking to be treated more professionally, just like the New Zealanders were. The letter from the players was completely ignored by the Big Five, and in fact they sacked the manager and his assistant, the 2 people who had brought them third in the World Cup and a Five Nations tournament just a few months ago. The union then doubled down on the blame game, issuing a report that stressed how disappointed they were with the New Zealand tour and basically blamed the coaches and the players for the disastrous results on the field. After that, I think a lot of players became angry and disillusioned, and this triggered the first wave of an exodus north to rugby league and professionalism. The next task for Johnathan as Welsh captain was to welcome Romania to the Cardiff Arms Park. This was expected to be a bit of a walkover, but it turned out to be anything but that. Romania were physically dominant throughout the game and bullied Wales, recording a famous win for their country. The fallout was massive, and Johnathan as captain and outside half shouldered more blame than anyone else in the press and at the hands of the union who hung him out to dry. It is important though to put some context on this result. Romania were basically all in the army, and they had been doing nothing but training every single day to prepare for this game for weeks, so they basically came into this game as kind of like a pseudo-professional outfit. The nuance didn't matter though. The players were absolutely slated in the press, Johnathan being the main one, and I think sniffing blood in the water, Widnes made a phone call to the outside half. This must have been such a difficult decision for him, being captain of his country and with a Lions tour in the not too distant future. And that was up against Widnes offering him a chance to get away from the pressure and the goldfish bowl of Welsh rugby, but mainly secure the future of his family. To be fair, he really had no option. So with much sorrow, he left Wales and headed north to play rugby league, becoming the highest paid player in the sport at the time. The fallout again was huge. There had been many exports from Welsh Rugby to league during the amateur era, but this one caused more headlines than any other. Rugby union supporters felt betrayed, and league supporters also looked wondering if Davies was even worth all that hype and money. League is of course an extremely physical game, and many thought his size would not translate to the new sport. He made his debut against Salford in front of a packed crowd, coming on the wing, and quickly put paid to any doubts that he would not make it in rugby league. In fact, the professional aspect allowed him to bulk up, improving his skill, athleticism and physicality, which, with his amazing brain and vision for space, took him into the next stratosphere of his ability. Back in Wales, this set a precedent, and in that year, 10 Welsh players left Wales and went north to play professional rugby league. For Davies, though, there was no looking back. He took to league like a duck to water. He wasn't the biggest, but his acceleration off the mark, footwork and balance made him a formidable opponent to try and tackle once he got into his stride. In his first 2 years, he had already won the league twice and been capped for Great Britain, not to mention winning the Player of the Year award, which is just tremendous for someone who hadn't even watched the sport 18 months prior. After 2 years in Widnes, the club released him and he moved to Warrington, where he again won Player of the Year and was named as Rugby League Man of Steel. Not satisfied by all the accolades in the Northern Hemisphere, in the off-season he headed south to Australia, signing and playing for the Canterbury Bulldogs. On his return to the Northern Hemisphere, he was given the captaincy of Great Britain, and all of this happened within a short 3-year period. After an incredibly successful period, to say the least, in rugby league, unfortunately Johnathan's wife was diagnosed with cancer, so he came to the difficult decision to hang up his boots and return back to Wales to be closer to friends and family. As fate would have it though, Johnathan returned to Wales, and completely out of the blue, rugby union went open and turned professional.
Former Welsh Rugby international Johnathan Davies says he may return to Wales to play rugby union now that the game has turned professional. It's believed many league players could be tempted back following the decision by the International Rugby Board to allow players to be paid.
There was now a chance for Johnathan to earn a living and still be at home to support his wife. Breaking barriers as usual, Johnathan was the first player to re-sign back down to union from league. Now back in Cardiff, the national side obviously came knocking, and in a really tough period for Wales, it was hoped that Johnathan could come back and really cause a spark. Unfortunately for Jiffy, he was past his best, and perhaps rugby league had had his best years. He managed a few extra caps for Wales, but he knew it was time to hang up his boots. And as always, he marked his final game with another historical day, as this game was the last ever game at Cardiff Arms Park before it was ripped down and turned into the Millennium Stadium. Tragically, shortly after this, his wife succumbed to her illness and unfortunately passed away, leaving Johnathan to be the sole parent for their 3 young children. After finishing playing, he was looking for his next career move to support his young family. Luckily for Johnathan, his charisma and knowledge lent perfectly to punditry, and he quickly got a reputation as an insightful but fun TV analyst, not only in Union, but as he did in his playing career, crossing codes and covering rugby league, which is just mighty impressive and just shows what a fantastic rugby brain the man has. You could argue though, his most impressive feat was becoming president of Felindra Hospital, that focuses on taking care of cancer patients, and of course took care of his wife in her final days. Johnathan still is a massive part of Felindra now, and to this date is a big part of raising multi-million pounds worth of money for that charity, which helps care for people and treat them in their greatest hour of need, which might be his most impressive feat yet in a very, very impressive career. Thanks for watching.